Welcome everyone to part one on modern Georgia. We're going to talk about a lot of different people and events that happened in the state since World War II. So there was a lot of agricultural transformation after World War II. We were no longer being solely an agricultural state. We were becoming quite industrial because many people were moving to cities during the war for the wartime industries, creating a lot of growth. There was an introduction of synthetic fabrics, so the demand for cotton farming is falling. So they began to introduce new crops like peanuts. Poultry becomes a source of income. And new machinery such as tractors creates a lesser need for workers. And the new machineries allows the farms to grow. They even double and triple in size because they don't need as many people to work large amounts of land because of the new machinery. And so with the less need for farm employees, cities began to grow even more than they were during the war. So by 1970, you can see the numbers there of 60% of Georgia's population is living in cities now. Now, Atlanta begins to develop during the war too and after the war because returning veterans come back home and they get the GI Bill. They can attend college. They begin attending universities in the city of Atlanta. They begin to buy houses in the city, and suburbs begin to grow up on the outskirts of Atlanta. Businesses began to move into the state because, like we talked about in our geography unit, Georgia has a wonderful mild climate that lures companies, especially northern companies, to come down here. There's fewer weather-related absences. We don't have massive snowstorms all the time. This year was kind of an anomaly. We don't have snow and ice like that usually. People aren't prepared for it, as was very evident this year. As the state economy diversified, air conditioning's introduced, even more people move into the state. Descendants of African Americans move back because segregation is beginning to end. So by 54, 800 new industries have appeared in Georgia, in Atlanta, and Atlanta goes from being the 32nd largest city to the 23rd. We introduce freeways, interstates. Our airport offers international flights, linking Atlanta to places all over the country and the world. MARTA is established. They even establish a rapid rail line by 1979. And so our population almost doubles from 1950 to 1970. So today, more than half of the state's population lives in Metro Atlanta. So we've talked about Maynard Jackson, which is half of the name of Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson Airport, now William Hartsfield. He was a mayor of Atlanta for 6 terms, and the reason why his name is associated with the airport is he made Atlanta an aviation hub of the Southeast. He's the one that got the city to buy the area at Candler Park to build the airport. And he also led the city in the area of civil rights, organizing a biracial coalition that worked on voter registration drives, hiring 8 African American police officers. They had limited duties in their job, but ultimately it's a step in integration because it's something that's unheard of in most of the Southeast. He also helped to integrate schools, buses, and even lunch counters. Ivan Allen Jr. was also a mayor of Atlanta, and he continued Hartsfield's approaches, removing colored and white signs from all entrances and exits of City Hall, integrated the city's fire department and city government, helped create new construction in the city, building one of the city's first skyscrapers, Peachtree Center. Not the biggest skyscraper in downtown Atlanta today, but it is right next to the Georgia Pacific building if you ever drive downtown. He also helped bring 2 professional sports teams during his term, and he helped convince Fulton and DeKalb County to extend MARTA into their counties, helping promote the building of that rapid rail line, because before this time MARTA had just kind of been a bus service, not the rapid rail line that we know it to be today. The major league sports that Allen helped bring in were the Milwaukee Braves. They said, we'll come to Atlanta if you build us a stadium. So 51 weeks later, Atlanta Fulton County Stadium was built. And by 1966, the Atlanta Braves played their first game in the new stadium. Now, the Braves are moving from from what's now Turner Field. Atlanta Fulton County Stadium is actually part of the parking lot of what is now Turner Field today, and the Braves will be moving from Turner Field in a few years out to Cobb County. And in the same year, the Falcons began playing in what was Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. When the Braves were done with their season, the Falcons would play football there. And the Falcons are getting a new stadium in downtown as well. Other teams followed, the Hawks, and then in 2008, the Atlanta Dream. We also had the Atlanta Flames was our first hockey team, and then the Thrashers, which have since left the city. And collectively, the sports teams have accomplished the goal that city leaders wanted. They've raised the prestige of the city, and they've generated millions of dollars each year in revenue. And this year, we celebrated Hank Aaron's 715th home run that broke Babe Ruth's record. That was celebrated at the opening game for the Braves just this past week. Ellis Arnold became governor in 1942 by defeating Eugene Talmadge. He was the first governor to serve a 4-year term. Prior to that, all governors only served a 2-year term. He was the youngest governor in the nation, and he took steps to correct problems that Talmadge had created with university accreditation. Talmadge had lost UGA's university accreditation, which meant that any student that graduated from UGA, their diploma really technically didn't matter because the university didn't have accreditation. And Talmadge lost that accreditation by firing some African American employees of the university. And so Arnold steps in and gets that fixed by taking the Board of Regents that controlled the university system away from the governor's office. The governor didn't have direct control of that anymore. It was still a part of the executive branch, but they now had their own director who ran the board instead of the governor running the board. Arnold also removes the prison system from the governor's control, which establishes a board of corrections to oversee prisons. He also helps abolish the poll tax and develops a new state constitution. He led Georgia to being the first state in the nation to grant 18-year-olds the right to vote, which other states don't do that until the constitutional amendment that I believe came about in the early 70s. And his basis on having that right to vote given to 18-year-olds is that if men could be drafted to fight in the Army, they should be old enough to vote. And he ran against Lester Maddox in the primary of 1966, but was defeated. Now, we've talked about the county unit system, which gives the rural areas power in primaries, and it was around since 1917. But in April of 1962, the Georgia Federal Court ruled that the unit system, violated the 14th Amendment. So now we shift political power from the rural to the urban areas, because now everybody's vote is the same, it's equal. And this allows more African American politicians to be elected, Leroy Johnson being the first of those elected to the state Senate since Reconstruction. Now, the federal court decision on the county unit system was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court in Gray v. Sanders. Many people were unhappy with losing the county unit system. And this is the first time we hear the phrase one person, one vote, which ultimately means that every citizen's vote should be equal to every other citizen's vote, no matter where the person lives. In 1964, the federal court rules again that Georgia's Constitution is violating this one person, one vote concept. And in Westbury v. Sanders, the U.S. Supreme Court stated that legislative districts should depend solely on population rather than on county boundary lines. Now, we keep seeing this name Sanders. Sanders was our state attorney general at the time. The General Assembly had to redraw the congressional voting districts to ensure that the districts were of equal population sizes. And Georgia has had to reapportion the state multiple times since then and has faced legal battles based on how they have reapportioned since then as well. And many other states have too. Basically, every 10 years after a census, many states have to redraw their districts because they may gain or lose population, and that requires them to redraw their districts. And Sanders, as I was saying, was the state attorney general in this case, and so these individuals were suing the state of Georgia on these systems, on the county unit system, on the reapportionment, and he represented the state of Georgia in these cases. That's why we see his name twice. And so, like I said, Georgia, this is not the first time that Georgia had to reapportion or redraw their congressional districts. We've had to do it multiple times since then. We faced legal battles because of our reapportionment since this time, and so have other states. It's not uncommon for this kind of thing to happen. Jimmy Carter was born in Plains in October of 1924, and he served in the Navy and then resigned from the Navy to take over his family's, mainly the family's peanut farm, and then was elected to the Georgia Senate and in 1970 as governor of Georgia. During his time as governor, he reorganizes the state's executive branch, influences the court system, and appoints the first woman as state judge. He created systems which help protect our natural and cultural resources, worked to equalize funding for schools across the state, expanded special education, vocational education, and preschool education, and expanded state mental health services. And then he surprises many people by deciding to run for president, and he campaigns tirelessly across the country and ultimately defeats Gerald Ford. But he only served one term as the president of the United States, and he's been the only president from Georgia so far. Now, there's reasons why he only served one term, but he did do some good things as president. He created a national energy policy, major civil service reforms, expanded the national park system, and you can read the rest of the list there. One of the big things being creating the Department of Education. But he had some domestic economic problems that plagued his term. There's a recession that starts during his term of office that he's ultimately blamed for, and a gas crisis, people waiting in long lines in their cars trying to get gas. There's terrorism threats, but he is remembered for negotiating the Camp David peace accords between Israel and Egypt. And then he got congressional ratification of the Panama Canal treaties and full diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. He removes the U.S. from the 1980 Summer Olympic Games because Russia invades Afghanistan. And he's still today championed as a worldwide human rights activist. He's even won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work. But this is ultimately what kind of does him in as president outside of the economic problems is when the U.S. Embassy in Iran is taken over and 52 Americans are seized and they're held captive for 14 months. They are released the day Carter leaves office, and it's ultimately seen as the main cause of his presidential defeat to Ronald Reagan in 1980. He and his family returned to Georgia, and today he's still admired for his ability to negotiate peace and for his Habitat for Humanity programs. Now, Georgia has predominantly had just a one-party system. Democrats for state offices, federal offices are usually Republicans. And so in many southern states that was typical, but then there becomes a political shift. Most citizens elect Democrats, like I just said, to state offices, but Republicans to national offices. So we see a shift in the 80s and 90s, and this is the first shift we see since the Bourbon Redeemers. Mac Mattingly of St. Simons becomes the first Republican elected to the U.S. Senate from Georgia since Reconstruction, and in 1992, most of Georgia's congressional seats were elected Republicans. So that's when we began to see the shift. And so by the election of 2002, we see another shift. Republicans end over 100 years of rule by Democrats with the election of Perry native Sonny Perdue. Now, state politics is very different than national politics. That's what I want you to get from this slide, is we'll have Democrats running most of our state offices, but then Republicans running our national offices. And it's just the way things work. Political platforms and things aren't quite the same on the state level that they are on a federal level. All right, we have two more slides from this, and I'm going to make that part 2 of the presentation, and we'll be starting with the Olympic Games of '96.